Hey, we're going to start in another minute or two if you want to join us. This is about the time in the conference where you start to hear the keys jingle and the boarding passes come out. So we want to be especially grateful for those of you who are able to stay to the very end. And at the end of the conference, I'll have a few reminders for those of you who remain. But since some of you may even have to leave during this time, let me just say that I remember Gina Moore's 3 W's. We will, I hope it's okay, Gina, if we reappropriate them or misappropriate them for many different purposes. Because one of the things that happens at a conference like this is I see so many of you I would like to have had long conversations with. So I wish I'd had those conversations. And I worry that I would have learned a whole bunch of things I didn't. And I wonder if you'll come next year so I can have those conversations with you in Loma Linda. How'd I do, Gina? Yeah, okay. Next year, May 8 and 9, we'll meet in Loma Linda. And I'm wondering if you'll show up. And I'm counting on many of you being there. And bring your friends along. To make this learning collaborative, truly collaborative, we need all the systems participating. And we rotate it around because, as we might predict, and it's been true here, we have more people who come to us from the Florida system, up and down this your corridor here, because they can get here without a big plane ride. We'll be back in Loma Linda. That makes it a little easier for the West Coast. But, you know, it's about the same distance from the East Coast to the West as it is the other way. And I've noticed that somehow it always seems further going one way than the other. But just keep that in mind. Well, we're going to wrap up here with what we've called, Carlyle, Walton, and I, the prophetic voice of Adventist healthcare. Maybe a little presumptuous, but we really mean it. We think that if we take seriously what we've heard from people like Patrick Smith, Alex Bryan, Ted Hamilton, many of you in the sessions, and certainly what we heard from Marilyn Link today, we have a responsibility to be a prophetic movement. That's what Adventists were born to be. And in many of our cases, we're the largest employers in our region. Up until Amazon showed up with their huge warehouses at our place, we were by far the largest private employer in our part of California, with thousands and thousands of employees as you have here. So we become one of those things that Robert Wood Johnson calls an anchor institution. Well, it's not a very good metaphor. I would have liked a rudder institution or a sail institution or, you know, something that moves and an anchor. What's that? Dead weight. But anyway, an institution that's been around a long time, but actually provides a central service for the whole community. So what we're talking about is that kind of responsibility. And we've been working on developing statements that we hope reflect what Jesus said when he said he was here to provide good news to poor people, to release those who are captives, give sight to the blind, and let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord. Some scholars think that's probably a way of referring to the year of Jubilee, when people are set free. So that's really what we're talking about in these last few minutes. I think you found this, Carlyle, but you and I agreed this was a good way to set the stage. The man of Galilee loved everyone, especially those looked down upon. By the religious leaders of his day, he was a man for all people, welcoming tax collectors, prostitutes, lepers, and assorted sinners, namely people like all of us. He called all back to their high calling as sons and daughters of the living God. He gave them a sense of belonging. Wonderful passage from William Johnson, one of the great teachers in Adventism, the seminary, the editor of the Adventist Review for so many years, in his wish list for Adventists. Here's an image that may help us think about what we're talking about now. We're talking about health policies. You're going to hear in just a moment from the president of the Adventist Health Policy Association. All of you probably already knew there was such an association, right? I've been in audiences where they've never heard of you. I'm sorry, Carlyle, but we're still creating that reality mentally for many people. And yet, health policies are going to shape our collective lives together. So much of what we do is affected for good or ill by policies. And when we think about policies, we can think about them in terms of the federal government. That often comes to people's mind. And Carlyle is located in Washington, D.C. But there are also policies at the state level, the county level, the city level, and there are policies in all of your hospitals. Policies, the closest word to policy in English, I think, you just change one letter, policy, and it's police. It's a way of enforcing things. Actually, both comes from the same Greek background for the Greek scholars. Polis, right, like metropolis. Polis, it just means the people, actually, gathered together. So health policies are this huge ship that I believe, and I hope you do too, at their best float on a sea of convictions about what really matters. So policy is just the publicly visible part of the values we share, for good or ill. They may be values that are corrosive and lead to bad policies. Are there any bad health policies in the U.S.? Probably have been. Or the failure to develop good ones. So the Adventist Health Policy Association is led by Carlyle, and it was their board, made up of CEOs, as you've already heard, who began to call for some shared statements of principle. I call them principle consensus statements, to deal with some of the most challenging issues. And when I like to think of it as when the press calls up and asks Carlyle Walton as president of the public policy voice for all of the health systems about where we are on controversial issues like the one that came up in the news prominently yesterday, and will again in the next few days, what's he supposed to say? And under whose authority? Anyway, he's going to talk to us about that. Carlyle, your turn. Tell us about that. Oh, you bet you're on.
Good afternoon, and thank you for sticking around. As Jerry told me when we worked on this presentation together, he said, somebody's got to be last, so we'll take them home. And that's our objective. Vintage Dr. Winslow, one of the great blessings of my life after having stepped into this role in mid-2018, has been collaborating with this man that I refer to as the mantle of reason and wisdom on so many levels. So APA, the Adventist Health Policy Association, and I know Jerry was being a bit tongue-in-cheek when he said, you all know about APA, so let me share just briefly a bit about the Adventist Health Policy Association. And if you go on our website, what you see on the screen will be one of the banners that will greet you, because this is who we are and what we're all about. We're about healthcare for the whole person. As a matter of fact, our mission statement is promoting wholeness to live God's healing love. And it's a fusion of the mission statements of the 5 systems that we are privileged to be a part of. It's healthcare for the whole person. I encourage you to take a moment and visit our website. We continue to add resources there that are all system-driven and rooted in our mission. A bit of the history. The immediate past president and one of my great mentors, Dr. Don Jernigan, had the idea back in 2010 and invited his fellow CEOs to get together back then once a year just to talk about policy issues. And it was a very informal conversation. I jokingly tell some of them, it was their support group to talk about things they were wrestling with. And because of Dr. Jernigan's influence, and Advent Health, back then Adventist Health System, was the primary funder of this organization. The first president was Rich Morrison, who laid wonderful groundwork, but he was headquartered here in Orlando, Florida, and at times made periodic trips to Washington, D.C. And we serve as the united policy voice for the 5 Seventh-day Adventist health systems ministering in the United States. 96 hospital campuses and growing. Many affiliated facilities. And today, we are by far collectively the largest Protestant healthcare system in the United States. You see the number there, 22 billion in net revenue. That's now about 24 billion in net revenue and growing. So we are a meaningful voice because in the U.S. Senate, there are 16 states represented, so 32 senators represent our states and the District of Columbia. And we continue to focus on making our mission our reality of promoting wholeness. And that's a very different approach. Everyone is at the healthcare feeding trough trying to get more money. We're there too, by the way. But we take a bit of a different approach. And this is our structure. Our member systems, my board of directors is comprised of the 5 system CEOs. And then we have, of course, the sage wisdom of Dr. Hart, who is a part of our board. I function as the president of the organization, reporting to that board. And back in November of 2018, we opened our first office in Washington, D.C. Literally every morning that I drive into the office, our office is located 2 blocks from the Capitol. So I see the dome of the Capitol. You know, when you look at the nightly news and you see those shots of the Capitol in the background, most of those news organizations are in the building where we are housed. So I have the privilege of running into some famous names every now and again. And I can tell you, the folks from NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox News, CNN, and C-SPAN that are in the building, I see them breaking bread together all the time. So we're the ones who get caught up in our partisan behavior. They're pretty good friends. I can assure you of that. I see it every day. And at every system level, there is representation in the governmental affairs and public policy space. And these individuals have a dotted line relationship with what we do in Washington, D.C., as we look at global priorities and support them in statewide priorities. Back in 2015, this was a collaborative publication that was done, 5 Steps to Health in America, under Rich Morrison's leadership. And I remember Dr. Winslow was one of the many people who went to Capitol Hill and distributed this document. It was our health policy agenda for the incoming President and Congress of the United States. Unfortunately, soon after this was distributed, there was a change in leadership at one of our major systems, and the chair at that time of the upper board was Terry Shaw, and Terry gathered with his colleagues and said, listen, if we will be a national influence, we need to make a commitment to be serious about this. So there was a period of study. What will APA be when it grows up? And during that period of study, not much follow-up occurred with this publication. But the decision was made, and that's when hands were laid on me in June of 2018 to move to Washington, D.C. to get our office up and going on a federal level and build stronger federal relationships. So the first project we undertook was to create a second edition of 5 Steps to Health in America. And you notice the nuance change there, health and well-being in America. And one of the reasons we focused on this is because when I arrived in DC and started making my Hill visits, one of the first things people would say to me when I gave them a business card and they saw what it said, they said, you guys were the ones who give us a policy agenda and you never followed up. And they were pretty polite, but they were very clear about that. And I promised them that we will do that. So with the help of the Institute at Loma Linda and many folks, some in the room, and others, every system was engaged in developing our new policy agenda. And it has 5 steps, and under those 5 steps, there are 40 specific recommendations on how we truly can become a healthier nation. One of the areas I focused on was partnering with our Seventh-day Adventist organizations, and I'm delighted that ABC is on that list, but working with ADRA and with the public affairs and religious liberty folks at the NAD, and with Benita Krause, who now is with Ministry and Magazine and Liberty, but working to collaborate. And one of the first things we collaborated on was addressing the Equality Act that would have created a lot of problems for us, and we worked to reshape that into the Freedom for All Act. Now, the truth is both are stalled in the U.S. Senate, but the Freedom for All Act helps to protect many of the benefits we receive under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Equality for all would have jeopardized many of those freedoms. But we continue to work together as we partner. And one of the first projects we undertook was to develop guidelines for the care of transgender persons. As a board, the CEOs made a list of thorny issues that they wrestle with, that just looking at the church's position, which we honor and respect, was not sufficient. You know, it goes back to one of the breakout groups the one I attended before this session. Alex was talking about the fact that we need to stop bifurcating the theology and the practical part of what we do. And we seek to bring those together. And under Dr. Winslow's leadership, he has been that steady hand to guide us through the process. And on the Bioethics Consortium website, we have our policies are housed there, and they're also housed on the APA website. Jerry, do you want to take this portion, or I can do this portion, whichever you prefer?
Actually, as you can tell, we don't have this entirely scripted, so we'll make it up as we go. But just a word about the consortium. How many of you, I was awakened by the fact that reading early this morning the report from Edwin Hernandez's study that many people you work with, obviously not you in the room, never heard of the Adventist Bioethics Consortium. I don't take that as a negative thing. It means God isn't finished with this yet. We still have work to do. So these are the participating organizations. You've heard about them, and you see them in your, and if you go over here, you see the fine people. One more click on that clicker. You see all these people, some of whom are in the room, that helped to lead this, and they met last night to chart the course for the future. And I think there's one more, maybe. Well, we know where we are and why we're doing it. I would encourage you to read this part just to see if you find yourself consonant with or agreeing with those goals for us. But a big part of this is to clarify understanding between the church and its health systems. We have a relatively small denomination in North America running, at least associated with, and its name's on, very large health systems. How do we keep that together in a way that is truly synergistic and not dissonant? That's a big part of the challenge. So that's maybe enough for me. Why do we need the collaboration now? You can tell us that came from your board, Carlyle.
Absolutely. As we looked at the list of thorny issues, the board decided that they were ready to take that step to develop guidelines and commitment statements to address these issues. And here is one of the reasons why. There were 78 media outlets that reached out to me when we opened our office on the 1st of November in 2018. 76 of them had very wonderful things to say about our presence in DC. And there was this one organization that called, and by the name you'd never figure, you think there's some IT company, Rewire.news. And they focus on issues within the transgender community. So this is the article that they wrote after reaching out to all of our systems, and what they received in response when they were asked about what is our attitude towards the transgender community and reproductive issues. The answer they received from every system was no comment. You know what the press, how they love no comment. It's license for them to create the story. And Rewire took the initiative and created this story and branded us out of the box as another organization in Washington, D.C., here to restrict reproductive rights. And it took some work. Fortunately, as I said, all of the other news outlets saw us as additive and positive to the federal landscape. That was the focus of the article from Rewire. And it became very evident to our CEOs that no comment, and I think they knew that fundamentally, but no comment is not the way to respond when these thorny issues are brought to bear. So this was the initial list that they made of things they would like us to address. And Dr. Winslow was only too willing to say, I'd be happy to assist with the process. However, each CEO identified a senior executive to participate in the collaborative to address these issues, develop guidelines and statements, bring the statements back to them, eventually for publication on the OPPO website as public-facing statements, and also to be a part of the ABC website and resources. So this was the very first that we addressed, principles for treatment of transgender persons. Jerry, why don't you talk a little about this one, since this was your baby to get us started.
We don't always get to choose the one that we would work on first, but I was pleased to work on this because I have a person who's become a good friend who is transgender. And one of the rules that I've asked for that you may remember this phrase from the civil rights days, nothing about us without us? You ever heard that? Nothing about us without us. So one of the rules I followed is we're not going to write any statements about caring for transgender persons unless we've involved transgender persons in the writing and vetting of the statement. So we were able to do that in the development of this statement with the involvement of good friends who are dedicated Seventh-day Adventist transgender persons. Can you put all those words together in a phrase? Yeah, that is a reality. And I think that if you go to the ABC website, which is AdventistBioethics.org, and you look under the guidelines there, you'll find the statement, and I hope you're pleased with the result. It's never completely finished, because why can't it be finished? Well, even one of the principles is we're going to keep learning about where science takes us here. We don't imagine that we know everything. So that will continue to develop, and we will update as things are called for. But that was the first one that we did. And I would really encourage you to be aware of it at least, because even though it may not come up often in your systems, it will come up, and I won't go into some of the cases that are already emerging legally, but I predict it will come up more and more legally.
And we have heard earlier today when we listened to Dr. Simmons and Jessica share about health disparities, and this was a report that was published by the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Don't need to read those statistics to you. I think they speak for themselves. And Dr. King, and I think Alex referenced this in one of his presentations, or I think it was Dr. Smith, Patrick Smith, that of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane because it often results in physical death. So some of the things we've done together, and you see some familiar faces there, we co-sponsor webinars as partners. And Dr. Simmons and Dr. Josefora Montez, who held that role at Kettering, they led a webinar that was a collaboration between ABC and APA. I mentioned earlier that every system identified a senior executive to be a part of the task forces, the collaboratives that we did in the development of these statements. And you see the names here of the individuals who participated. So you see 2 check marks and one that's almost a check mark. And these were the last 3 statements that were developed under the careful guidance of Dr. Winslow. And I think it was a journey of patience and endurance, because those first 2 statements, I think they were approved by the APA board after draft 13. And you know, that can be frustrating, but for us it was not, because it spoke about the diligence that our CEOs put into these statements. I mean, we did get into some word smiting every now and again, but they wanted us to be very clear when these were published that these are statements that they could live with, but also actualize within the respective systems. And I think the third statement, respect and inclusion of LGBTQ plus persons, as Dr. Winslow said about the transgender statement, we included 2 individuals as a part of our collaborative who are committed Seventh-day Adventist Christians who are a part of the LGBTQ plus community, to inform us as we went through the process. Jerry, would you like to add a bit more to that, please?
Good chance for me to say thank you to a person who really helped us. Marilyn, thank you. Marilyn Link helped to lead the successful landing of this overarching document, building on a document that came from you, Joyce, from Adventist Health, Adventist Health in the West, on the West Coast. So it's a nice representation of the collaboration that can go on effectively. And the CEOs, the APA board, wanted an overarching statement under which they could put all the other specific ones. And the first specific one beyond the overarching statement is the one on racial justice. And it has been approved, and I encourage you to go and read that. I take great hope in it, the ethics of hope. I think we're near the finish line on the one that some people think will be even more sensitive. It's not quite ready for release yet, but I think maybe later this month. We'll see.
We have an APA board meeting scheduled for May 11th, and we anticipate that the CEOs will approve as a public-facing statement the respect and inclusion for LGBTQ plus persons. And just some of the preamble to the Achieving Health Equity Through Racial Justice statement, framing it within the context that we view everyone as a precious child of God. And you know, there were some words in there. You take the last sentence, that the belief in fundamental human equality leads us to embrace the goal of health equity and work to overcome structural racism that results in inequitable health outcomes. For each of these statements, and we kept them to a page, for each of these statements, we had very clear commitment points. You know, I've learned from my friends with Ascension Health, they don't call these bullet points, they call them dot points because it's about political correctness. But our dot points are listed here on that first statement. Learning to apologize, and I had the privilege, and where are you, Marilyn? See a big smile on Marilyn's face because she helped to guide this process. But I was enriched, I was blessed that one of our member systems, Adventist Healthcare out in Gaithersburg, had a very public event at a large Seventh-day Adventist church that I don't think coincidentally sits literally within the shadow of the General Conference headquarters, the South Asian Seventh-day Adventist Church, and had a public event where they apologized for the atrocity that was perpetrated on Lucy Byard, a black Seventh-day Adventist member who was turned away in 1943 from the Washington Sanitarium because she was black. Came from Jamaica, New York, for care, very ill, and she was placed in a car with her husband when it was discovered that she was black, and sent to Freedman's Hospital, which, by the way, is today Howard University Medical Center, which, by the way, is now a part of Adventist Healthcare.
Amen.
God has amazing ways of doing his business.
I love it.
And what you see there is a portrait that was done that sits in a high traffic area at now White Oak Medical Center, the new name for Washington Sanitarium, that tells the story of Lucy Byard. And this portrait was painted by Simi Knox, who is the portrait artist that painted the portrait of Bill and Hillary Clinton that hangs in the National Portrait Gallery. Son of a sharecropper. And there's only one known picture that's not great definition of Lucy. I remembered at the dedication ceremony, Simi said, Lucy and I, we spent many nights together as I tried to extract from that grainy picture this powerful woman. But the event saw the leader of the Seventh-day Adventist World Church, of the North American Division, of many organizations stand up and apologize for this atrocity. And at the end of the day, that acknowledgement was a moment of healing. In addition to that, $500,000 of nursing scholarships were committed by Adventist Healthcare for students, minority students, attending Howard University, attending Oakwood University, and Washington Adventist University. Is it enough? Probably not. But I thought it was a wonderful start and an amazing start. And all of our systems, if we choose to mine and dig deep enough, we have opportunities to apologize and learn together. This is a picture of Simi Knox, the portrait artist, and Lisa Sweeney Walker, the only known relative of Lucy Byard, who is alive today and in the area. And they were a part of that wonderful dedication service. The state, thank you. And kudos to Terry Ford and his entire administrative team for that very public acknowledgement of an atrocity and a promise that it will never happen again. This is the overarching comment on our statement for respect and inclusion of LGBTQ plus persons. We're giving you a preview since it has not been officially approved by the board, but we anticipate that they will do that. And then the commitment dot points that are listed about being informed, about being equitable in the way that we interact, about promoting preventative care. Very thoughtful statements coming from the task force. Jerry, say a few words about, are these just words on a page?
Maybe you can click that clicker one more time and we'll put this up there. Sometimes even when I'm working on documents like this, I ask myself, is this just kind of a waste of time? Because there's a huge amount of human time and capital put into the development of these statements. And really, in the end, what difference does it make? I have to believe that it matters. We are a people we are a community of memory. And unless we shape that memory in some kind of documentation that we can look back on, we will forget. And so I like to tell the story about this. You probably can't read this, but this is the Gettysburg Address. I don't know if anybody here ever had to memorize it. I did not, but I guess school children have. But I was taking a scholar, a PhD researcher from Germany, around Washington, D.C. one evening. We'd been in a day of committee meetings, and it was a beautiful evening, and I saw the Lincoln Memorial, and we walked up the steps there, and I was showing her around inside, and she knew about Abraham Lincoln, most people do, but she knew nothing about the Gettysburg Address. So I described the setting. You know the setting, right? The terrible battle. A lot of people died. And I said, this is why he gave it. A lot of people died, and this was really like a memorial service for them to remember why. And she just read it. And by the time she got to the end of the statement here, there were big tears running down her face. And I thought, nothing I ever write's probably going to do that to somebody. Lincoln had a gift. But if you read especially the last of these words, Gary Wills in his book on Gettysburg says that reshaped the Republic. It recast what we think we are as a people. So I would say to all of us, don't underestimate the power of words that we agree on and covenant together to carry out. They can shape our future together. So I'm willing, and I hope you are too, to invest the time it takes to get to the goal line of the shared principled convictions that we have, on which the policies should rest.
So looking forward, this is a recent report from one of the indices that we evaluate, and it clearly shows the rich diversity of the Seventh-day Adventist faith. Rich diversity. And you think about some of the earlier slides about health disparities, the opportunities that we have to be leaders. They are innumerable, and we need to embrace them. We had some questions for discussion, and in the interest of time, we will take those as questions for reflection. We want you to think about these questions, and feel free to zip us an email, because we're seeking input. We want you to be a part of this process as we move forward collaboratively, APA and ABC. See, folks are taking pictures, so I'll give you another moment to ensure you
Just
get.
remember that one that hasn't been approved yet. Don't take a picture of it and send it to 300 of your close friends and neighbors until it's finally seen by the board.
And the slides will be available. So, but go ahead, just in case.
I just wanted the one before.
The one before.
Great.
This is a report of Pew Charitable Trust. It was a study that Pew did of diversity of American religious organizations, and we come out the top, and most of the other Christian denominations are not very close seconds when it comes to diversity.
Top of the index. You know, I recently returned from a 6-week educational sabbatical in Rongai, Kenya at the Adventist University of Africa. And the last class that I did was titled Emotional and Social Intelligence for Leaders. Pretty intense class, and one of my Kenyan classmates shared a story, and it reads, an anthropologist proposed a game to a gathering of African tribal children. He placed a bucket of sweets under a tree and made the children stand 100 meters away, then announced that whoever reaches the tree first would get all the sweets in the bucket. He then said, ready, steady, go. Do you know what the children did? They all held each other's hands, ran together towards the tree, divided the sweets among themselves, ate the sweets, and enjoyed them under the tree. The startled anthropologists asked, why? And together they all said, Ubuntu. And that's a Zulu word that means, translated into English, I am because we are. So, how do we find that in the Bible? I think it's found in Micah 6:8. Personally, we know that text. King James Version says, He had showed thee, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of thee? But to do justly, love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. You know, my friend Alex Bryan got us started with just a powerful devotion about loving our neighbor. And Eugene Peterson's delightful paraphrase, the message of that same text, says, but he's already made it plain how to live, what to do, and what God is looking for in men and women. It's quite simple. Do what is fair and just to your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in your love, and don't take yourself too seriously. Take God seriously. I close with this story. On June the 2nd, 2020, over 500 individuals associated with one of our member systems, Loma Linda University Health, participated in a highly diverse, peaceful demonstration on the campus that included leaders, staff, faculty, students, and the demonstration included the attendees kneeling in silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, which we have since learned was really 9 minutes and 29 seconds, a painful and deadly snapshot in American time. Loma Linda University Health President and one of my SAGE board members, Dr. Richard Hart, in a June 1, 2020 memorandum to the Loma Linda family wrote these words, and I quote, to see a plea for breath and life itself from George Floyd and a long line before him is painful to watch. That this occurred by a member of law enforcement makes this an injustice even more heartbreaking. I saw a picture of that demonstration and a sign held quietly with a quote from the recently deceased Archbishop Desmond Tutu that has been a propulsive force in my life and my leadership, and that will continue to be so. Emblazoned on that sign were these words: if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. APA and ABC, we have decided not to be neutral as we engage in healthcare transformation on a national and on an international level. We crave your continued prayers and your continued engagement as we embrace our mission of promoting wholeness to live God's healing love. And that requires engagement and not neutrality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlyle. We are, isn't it amazing, almost miraculous that we've stayed on time throughout this conference? And I really appreciate that. Thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to Terry Shaw, please pass it on, Ted, and to yourself and the other leaders for welcoming us to Advent Health. Thanks to Edwin Hernandez and Ron and Eric and the whole team here for welcoming us here within this building, Advent Health University. These are great resources. I'm impressed. And I do want to say that we welcome you to Loma Linda next year. I already given the dates. It's there. Get out your iPhones or whatever you use and put those dates in right now so you don't have to worry about remembering them. Mary Jane has asked me to remind you that we would love it if you'd recycle your badges. They probably won't amuse your grandchildren as much as you wish. They never do mine. So just put them on the table out there, and we'll recycle them. That's a good thing for the environment. Let me just end by saying that I hope you sense, as I do, that we're engaged in sacred work. I did get a kick out of what Patrick Smith said about philosophers and the longhorn steer, and a point here and a point there, and so forth. And I thought of another, if you indulge me this story for 30 seconds. A fellow was having trouble visiting with his dates. And he talked with his uncle, and his uncle said, there are always three things that will get a good conversation going: food, family, and philosophy. I'm looking at you, Alex Bryan. You just got a degree in bioethics. So the next time he was on a date, he thought, we'll try it out because it wasn't going well. And he said to her, do you like liver sausage? And she got a really yucky look on her face and said, no. There was a long, awkward pause. And then he remembered family. Do you have a brother? No. Then he remembered philosophy, and he said, well, if you'd have had a brother, do you think he would have liked liver sausage? You get the point. Those of us who study theology and philosophy are sometimes accused of those kind of questions, and we think people should be as amused by them as we are. This conference was not about that sort of thing. I hope you sense that these are very practical issues. We do want to bring faith to bear, and I think we've done that. So it's really sacred work, and in the end, it's what I call gospel practicality. It's really about Jesus and about living out the Jesus way. And that's why the ABC exists. It's why APA exists. It's why Adventist Health exists. Ethics and hope, whether you're an Adventist card carrying or not, you are an Adventist if you're a hopeful person, because the Advent is all about hope. And the ethics of hope is maybe one of the best slides I saw was the one about C.S. Lewis and the way there's that future door. And hope draws us into that future so that we can live better now, because we imagine a better future. And that shapes the way we think of what our ideals are now. So with all of that in mind, would it be okay if I close with a benediction in whatever way is meaningful for you? Creator of all the good gifts, including the great gift of allowing us to be together in person, sensing your spirit. Thank you for all of this. Keep us safe as we travel, and let us gather again in your name. I pray that in the name of our Lord Jesus. Amen.